Well, howdy. It's Bill Rose, the founder of the American People's Liberty Party. And I just wanted to say I was watching Thom Hartmann today, and he had some callers, and everyone agreed that what the Republicans would love to do if they could take the White House would be to turn us into serfs, like in the days of feudalism, where they owned you, and you had to do what they said. Otherwise, you starved to death. They want to take us back to the days of David Copperfield, if you ever read the novel David Copperfield. And I read that novel, and that's because when I hit 11th grade, the high school decided to put me into an accelerated English class. I guess they liked the way I wrote, or the way I understood the English language, I don't know. And so two of the books that I remember, one was David Copperfield and the other one was Tale of Two Cities. So I know what feudal England was like by reading about it. And so if you want to read those two books, then you'll understand what the Republicans are trying to do to the American working people. And I have to tell you, I wasn't always, I didn't always have this philosophy for the working people. 30 years ago or more, I was an Eisenhower type Republican. And I worked in security. And I worked my way up from just a guard all the way up to a first lieutenant investigator, supervisor. And when I was a sergeant, an armed sergeant for that particular security company, that was way before I ever went to work for the police department as a 911 worker, they sent me out to a meat packing company that was under a strike. And so it was my job to keep the strikers off the property. There I am, one lone guy, a sergeant, trying to control, like 50 strikers. Well, anyway, the city had dug up the street in front of the meatpacking company and making it really hard for the strikers to park anywhere and making it all muddy and everything. So one day they sent out this big, huge guy, bigger than James Arnett's. I guess people would call him a Union goon. He's gonna fight for his workers, right? And this guy approaches me and he starts like swinging at me and stuff, So I pull out my nightstick and I start swinging at him. I didn't want to hit him, I was trying to make this, a peaceful resolution without anybody getting hurt, but he sure wanted to hurt me. Finally, I just kept backing up and swinging at his knees with that nightstick, and got up to the office door, and it looked like he was going to lunge on me. So I pulled out my .38 and I said, "Back off, sucker, or I'm going to blow your head off." Which he did. He backed off. He had some common sense. So then I went into the office, called the cops. The cops came out and they chewed him a new butthole. Anyway, that was my experience with unions and strikes. I also was sent to a trucking company that was on strike, but basically I was stationed inside the office. Of course, I was armed, with the gates locked and so that nobody could get in. But this meatpacking company, they didn't have any gates around their parking lot in front of the office. They should have, if they wanted to keep people off, But nevertheless, I look back on those days and I say, the union people, they were just trying to get a raise. And if they hadn't sent that guy over, caused that problem, things would have went along smooth until the owner of the meatpacking company finally said, "Okay, we'll bargain with you, we'll give you this or that," or whatever, which eventually I assume they did, because I left that post, you want to call it a post, without ever knowing how the strike was resolved, and I never bothered to investigate. I didn't care, I was just doing my job, making my minimum wage. to survive, you know. But now I see that unions have really helped the middle class, and what's happening now is the Republicans want to take away those bargaining rights. They already did up in Wisconsin and places like that, and fired thousands of school teachers and fire department workers and police officers. Saw a thing on TV the other night where this one state trooper, he says he got a pink slip and Thursday's his last day or something like that. That's terrible, you know. Some of the other state troopers were willing to take a big cut or no health benefits or something like that, but he said no. He said I'm not gonna fall fool. He said no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna resign. So there are some people with integrity, and I hope that state trooper is able to find another position in law enforcement somewhere. And I understand in San Diego there's no age limit. Anybody who wants to be a police officer in San Diego, if they can pass the written test and run up a flight of stairs one step at a time and climb over a 6 or an 8 foot wall and drag a bag of 200 pounds of sand or whatever and run or whatever, you know, you'll pass and you'll become a police officer. But I don't think, the last I heard was that they weren't taking any more applications for the police academy. So maybe that leaves San Francisco, where the sheriffs get paid pretty good up there, deputy sheriffs. But I'm sure if he gets into the law enforcement computer, the jobs, he'll find something, you know, somewhere. Maybe even become a chief of police in a small town. You know, a lot of police officers do that. They'll put in 10, 15 years in a big police department, and then they'll go to some small town as the chief of police, like that chief of police in the movie Jaws. You remember him? Anyway, looking at my notes on my hand here, I think that some states are committing crimes against seniors. Now, in some states, it's a big bad no-no law to hurt a senior in any way. Just like you can't attack a federal worker, that's a felony. You know, like a mailman or a Social Security worker or something like that. But I'll tell you, there's one Social Security worker that I'd like to go get by the throat and slap the hell out of him because he's goose-stepping like a Nazi. And he cut me $200 from the $331 of SSI that the state of California gave me when I was 65 and a half. They said, well, you know, you're over 65, you're only getting 500 or whatever Social Security, so we're going to bring you up to the poverty level, which turned out to be around $890. That's the only way I can figure out what the hell the poverty level is. If anybody knows what the actual poverty level is, you know, make a comment on this video and let me know. I would like to know what in the hell is the poverty level. But this guy, Brian, in the Social Security office, he's a real wise ass, you know. When I called up to say what's going on, he said, well, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what. And he said, we may have paid you too much, and we may have to cut you another $100. And he said, but if it's not your fault, then you won't have to pay it. Well, evidently they consider it my fault. And I didn't do anything. You know, I put in the change of address. I called him up and I wrote him a letter and I said, here's my new address and blah, blah, blah. So it's not my fault that they overpaid me, which I don't think they did. I think they're just stealing from a senior. And I think they're stealing from seniors all over the states of California, Nevada, and many other states. And I think that's a crime against seniors. And so I think the FBI has to go into this one office and investigate. And I'm going to write the FBI a letter and say, this guy is committing a crime against me, and I'm a senior, and I want you to arrest him. Him and his supervisor, or his department head, whatever it is. Because he's goose-stepping like a Nazi. Anyway, I'm not going to let that get me all upset, because it's just not my nature, you know. My nature is to fight back like this. Fight back through the law, you know. If there was no law, I would go over there and slap the hell out of them and say, now you change that back to the way it was, or I'm going to slap the hell out of you more. But, you know, when I saw Trump get up and say on Labor Day, let's run these son of a bitches out of town. Well, he was talking about the governors and maybe about Congress. And I think Congress needs to be replaced. Both parties, because the Republicans are doing whatever the hell they want to do to hurt people, make them lose their jobs. And the Democrats are sitting around scratching their heads saying, what do we do? What do we do? But they're collecting their paychecks. Nobody's cutting their paychecks. Nobody's laying them off. So it's time we laid them off, folks. This coming election, we got to get out there and we got to vote them out. I don't care. Vote for an independent. Even if you have to vote for a Democrat, it's better than voting for a Republican. The Democrats are the lesser of the two evils. And I'll tell you one other thing. If you watch that documentary Gas Hole, you can find it on Link TV or Free Speech TV, you'll find out that all these different brand gas stations used to be one big giant corporation called Standard Oil. And I don't know, 30, 50 years ago, Congress made them break up that monopoly. And then so you get Shell and you get Texaco and you get, you know, 76 and all these other gas stations. But they still all are in cahoots raising the prices of gas. Okay, so how many people are tired of paying, you know, $3.66 a gallon when it was, you know, like almost $1 cheaper last year, and they just raised it up for the Labor Day holiday? They're saying, oh yeah, let's celebrate the Labor Day holiday. We'll suck money out of the people who do labor by raising the fuel pump prices. You know what I think? Maybe it's time that we nationalize the oil company all the oil companies in this country for like the next 10 years. Because they say that the level of unemployment will never come back down to 5% until the year 2017. My God, that's 6 years, isn't it? So, if we nationalize the oil companies, all of them in this country, and we put the CEOs in jail for bilking us, then maybe we'll start to see, you know, our economy change over a little bit. But what do you have to do to nationalize an oil company? I don't know. I guess the government has to agree to that. However, right now, both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are in the pockets of these corporations, and they're never going to do that. And that's why I say we got to vote them all out. Put in regular working people, like all these thousands of school teachers that have been laid off, police officers, firemen, and workers, county workers and city workers and state workers. Run for an office. Run for Congress. Run for mayor. Run for governor. Get a whole bunch of you together so you can afford the filing fees, because they've got a blockade or a stumbling block against the average person running for office. You got to put up $10,000, I think it is, for Congress. I don't know what it is for mayor or governor or whatever. But you've got to start forming organizations in every city and every state of the United States of America, and you have to start running for office and wipe out all these damn drones that are trying to turn us into feudal serfs. You want to be a serf? You want the big boss of a corporation to come in your house and say, hey, your 18-year-old daughter looks pretty good, I'm taking her. And you shut up or you're going to lose your job and you ain't going to get no food. That's the way it used to be. And back in, I think it was the 1660s, somewhere around there, there was a guy because the English soldiers were raping the women and stealing the people's property and their money and everything. He started a revolution. I'm trying to remember his name. It'll come to me. But anyway, what he did was he got together an army and he defeated the king's army. And then he took over the king's court. And after he realized that the parliament that was there were still friends of the king, because they had the king sequestered under house arrest, he booted out all those politicians and he brought in regular people to be politicians. And so England had a democracy in 1660 long before America did. What happened was, when that guy died, somebody brought back the son of the king, because the king was beheaded. Just like they did in France. They beheaded the king and they beheaded Marie Antoinette for being like Mubarak, you know, the Egyptian dictator who's now laying in a bed and in the jail cell in court. They were Mubaraks, and that's what these Republicans are. They're Mubaraks. And I call them pirates and vampires. But they're more like Mubaraks who want to run the world. But anyway, the king came back, the king's son came back, and somehow they lost their democracy after having it for like, I don't know, 30 years, something like that. Google the English Revolution, and let me try and think of that guy's name. If I don't think of it before the video ends, I'll type it in underneath, right under this video. But I'll tell you one other thing. I see these Republican candidates get up and speak, and I say, we need to give them IQ tests. They're a bunch of dunderheads. I think there should be a law that every presidential candidate should have to take an IQ test and be evaluated by psychiatrists. Because some of them are stupid and they're monsters. They're monsters. You don't see it because they've learned how to disguise it really good, you know. So we need a law. I don't know who would introduce that law. Maybe Bernie Sanders could introduce that law. That if you want to be a presidential candidate, then you have to be evaluated by a psychiatrist, and you have to take an IQ test. And if your IQ ain't over 150, you're gone. Because we don't need no dunderheads running America. That's for sure. Well, I guess that's about all I've got to say today. And, you know, if you're a Republican or you voted for the Republicans in the 2008 election, you realize you made a mistake. Now, maybe you're a diehard Republican, or maybe you think you're going to become one of those favorites if the Republicans got elected so that you could have special privilege. Well, people would just root you out anyway. Republicans get elected and they start doing all their dastardly deeds, you can bet the people are going to rise up physically. You can bet on that. I might not be here, but you can bet the people are going to say, hey, these son of a bitches are trying to destroy our lives. Let's get rid of them. And the people will. There's more people than there are politicians, folks. Look, there's 68 million seniors. If we wanted to, we could march to Washington, like one of my friends suggested. But I don't see what that would get us, because we could march there and stand there with signs saying, give us back our COLAs, give us back our SSI, leave Social Security alone. They would just ignore you, put the police, you know, with a barricade around you, so that, and maybe arrest some of you. That doesn't make any sense. The only thing that makes sense is to vote them all out and demand that they go back to the paper ballot, because those computer voting machines are rigged. I know, I'm a computer programmer. I know I can rig a program to say one thing and do another. Don't use those computer voting machines. Demand that each county, each city, Bring back the paper ballot and start doing it now.